Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Horizon and watched the stars drift past the viewport. The ship was heading home to Earth after another long survey mission in the Outer Rim. His crew had spent 6 months mapping dead worlds and empty space while the alien races got all the good assignments. Jake ran his hand through his dark hair and sighed. This was how things worked in the galaxy. Humans did the boring jobs while the real decisions got made by beings who had ruled space for thousands of years. Lisa Chang sat at the pilot station and checked their course. She was the best pilot Jake had ever worked with, but the Federation would never let her command her own ship. Humans were still considered too young and too reckless to be trusted with important missions. At the engineering station, Carlos Rodriguez monitored the engines. He had ideas for improvements that could make their ship twice as fast, but the aliens had banned humans from modifying Federation technology. Amy Johnson worked at communications and listened to the chatter from alien ships. Most of it was in languages humans were not allowed to learn. The Galactic Federation had welcomed humanity 200 years ago. Earth had been a primitive world with chemical rockets and nuclear weapons. The aliens had arrived with ships that could cross the galaxy in days and weapons that could destroy planets. They had offered peace and knowledge in exchange for cooperation. Humanity had accepted because they had no choice. Now human colonies existed on dozens of worlds, but always under alien supervision. Human technology had advanced, but never beyond what the aliens allowed. Human ships could travel between stars, but only on approved routes. Humans could join the Federation military, but only in support roles. The most powerful races in the Federation were ancient beyond human understanding. The Zephyrians had ruled their empire for 10,000 years. Their ships were massive and their weapons could crack moons. The Etherians were even older and claimed to have achieved perfect wisdom through meditation and study. They made most of the important decisions in the Federation Council. The crystalline hegemony had evolved from living rock and built cities that lasted for millions of years. Dozens of other races each had their place in the hierarchy, and humans were near the bottom. Jake had served in the Federation military for 15 years. He had seen human soldiers die protecting alien worlds while alien commanders took the credit. He had watched human scientists make discoveries that alien researchers claimed as their own. He had listened to alien politicians speak about the burden of guiding younger species toward civilization. The words always sounded reasonable, but Jake could hear the condescension underneath. Humans were useful, but they were not equals. The communication system chimed, and Amy looked up with concern. She was receiving a priority message from Earth on a secure channel. Jake told her to put it on the main screen. The image that appeared showed Admiral Marcus Bell in his office at Earth Defense Command. The old man looked tired and worried. Behind him, Jake could see other officers moving around with urgent purpose. Admiral Bell began to speak, and his words changed everything. The Zephyrian Empire had made a formal declaration to the Federation Council. They claimed that humanity was developing too quickly and posed a potential threat to galactic stability. The Empire demanded immediate action to control this threat. All human colonies beyond the solar system had to be abandoned within 30 days. Earth's population had to be reduced by half to prevent dangerous expansion. Any resistance would result in corrective measures. Jake felt his hands clench into fists. Lisa turned in her chair with anger in her eyes. Carlos cursed in Spanish, and Amy's face went pale. They had all known this day might come. Humans had been growing stronger and smarter for generations. Their technology had advanced faster than the aliens expected. Their colonies had prospered, despite constant restrictions. Some humans had even begun to question why they needed alien supervision at all. The Admiral continued with more details. Federation Council President Veltar had already approved the Zephyrian demands. The decision was final and would be enforced by joint Federation forces if necessary. Earth's government had been given the official notice and was preparing to respond. All human ships were ordered to return to Sol immediately and await further instructions. Jake cut the transmission and looked at his crew. They had a choice to make. They could follow orders and return to Earth to watch their species be crushed, or they could fight back against impossible odds. The Horizon was just one small ship against the combined might of the galaxy's oldest civilizations. But sometimes small ships could make a difference if they were in the right place at the right time. He made his decision and gave new orders. They would not return to Earth just yet. Instead, they would go to New Terra and warn the colonists what was coming. If the aliens wanted to destroy humanity's future, they would have to work for it. Jake Morrison did not know that this choice would set in motion events that would change the galaxy forever. He only knew that some things were worth fighting for, even when the fight seemed hopeless. The Zephyrian fleet arrived at New Terra like a storm of metal and fire. 60 massive warships dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation. Each ship was 3 times larger than anything humans had ever built. Their hulls gleamed with the dark metal that had conquered 100 worlds. War banners streamed from their weapon arrays in colors that hurt human eyes to look at. Admiral Marcus Bell watched them through the sensors of his flagship and felt cold fear settle in his stomach. Bell commanded the human defense fleet from the bridge of the UES Liberty. He had 12 ships under his command, and they were badly outmatched. The newest human warship had been built 20 years ago with technology the aliens had approved. The Zephyrian vessels used weapons that could turn asteroids to dust. But Bell had not come here to win. He had come here to buy time for the civilians to evacuate New Terra. Jake Morrison brought the Horizon into formation with the defense fleet. His survey ship had been hastily fitted with weapons and additional armor. Lisa Chang had pushed the engines beyond safe limits to reach New Terra before the aliens arrived. Carlos Rodriguez had worked for 3 straight days to upgrade their systems. Amy Johnson had coordinated with the other ships to establish a battle network. They were ready to fight, but they all knew how this would end. War Prime Kethvar commanded the Zephyrian fleet from his massive dreadnought. He had crushed 17 rebellions in his career and expected this to be equally simple. Humans were a young species with limited technology and no real military experience. The Federation Council had given him permission to use whatever force was necessary to ensure compliance. He intended to make this lesson memorable for any other species that might consider defying Zephyrian authority. Bell opened a communication channel and tried to negotiate. He explained that the colonists were peaceful farmers and scientists who posed no threat to anyone. He offered to discuss terms for a gradual withdrawal that would save lives on both sides. He appealed to the Zephyrian sense of honor and their duty to protect innocent beings. Kethvar listened to the entire speech without expression, and then gave his response. The Zephyrian dreadnought fired a single shot that vaporized the UES Defender and its crew of 200 humans. The blast lit up the darkness of space like a new star. Pieces of the ship scattered in all directions as metal turned to plasma. Bell realized that negotiation had never been an option. The aliens had come here to demonstrate their power and teach humanity its place in the galactic order. The battle began with a fury that surprised everyone involved. Human ships charged the alien formation with reckless courage. They fired missiles and particle beams while dodging weapons that could destroy them with one hit. The Zephyrians had expected the humans to break and run after the first demonstration of superior firepower. Instead, they fought like creatures possessed by madness. Lieutenant Danny Cooper flew a fighter escort mission for the evacuation transports. His squadron was supposed to screen the civilian ships while they escaped to hyperspace. But when 3 Zephyrian destroyers broke through the main battle line, Danny made a decision that changed everything. He turned his small fighter toward the massive alien ships and accelerated to attack speed. What happened next would be studied by military analysts for years to come. Danny somehow avoided the concentrated fire of 3 ships designed to destroy entire fleets. His fighter moved through space in patterns that seemed to violate the laws of physics. He rolled and twisted around energy beams that should have been impossible to dodge. The G-forces should have crushed him into paste, but somehow he stayed conscious and kept fighting. Danny fired his weapons with precision that defied explanation. Every shot hit exactly where it needed to hit. He targeted weak points in the alien ships that he should not have been able to see. His fighter's computer could not have calculated the angles he was using. Yet somehow Danny knew exactly where to aim and when to fire. One by one, the three destroyers exploded as their reactors overloaded. Similar impossible feats occurred throughout the battle. Human pilots displayed reaction times that exceeded the limits of biology. Engineers managed to keep damaged ships fighting long after they should have been dead in space. Gunners made shots that their targeting computers said were impossible. Medical staff saved wounded crew members who should have died from their injuries. Jake Morrison found himself understanding the flow of battle in ways he had never experienced before. He could see patterns in the chaos that allowed him to predict enemy movements. He guided the horizon through the battle like he was, dancing with the stars themselves. When Zephyrian missiles locked onto his ship, he somehow knew exactly when to change course to avoid them. When enemy fighters attacked, he positioned his ship to give his gunners perfect shots. The human defense fleet was eventually overwhelmed by superior numbers and firepower. Half the ships were destroyed and the rest were forced to retreat. But they had accomplished something unexpected. They had inflicted real damage on the Zephyrian fleet and delayed the invasion long enough for most civilians to escape. More importantly, they had demonstrated abilities that worried the alien commanders. As New Terra burned behind them, the surviving human ships regrouped at hidden bases in the asteroid fields. Dr. Susan Wright studied the battle recordings with growing amazement. The medical data showed impossible readings from human crew members during combat. Heart rates and brain activity had spiked beyond normal limits, but somehow the subjects had not only survived, but performed at superhuman levels. Intercepted alien. Communications revealed that the Zephyrians were reporting strange incidents to their high command. Human behavior during the battle had exceeded all projections based on previous encounters. Some pilots had survived in hard vacuum for several minutes after their ships were destroyed. Others had interfaced directly with damaged alien technology they had never seen before. The reports used words like unprecedented and potentially dangerous. Wright realized that something fundamental had changed during the battle. Humans under extreme stress had begun displaying capabilities that their own science said were impossible. She began collecting genetic samples from the survivors and discovered that their DNA showed signs of recent modification. Somehow, the stress of combat had triggered changes at the cellular level. The implications were staggering, but Wright needed more data to understand what was happening to her species. Dr. Susan Wright worked in the hidden laboratories beneath Europa Station, while Zephyrian patrol ships hunted human survivors throughout the system. The ice moon had been converted into a secret research facility years ago when some humans began to suspect they were being watched too closely. Now it served as humanity's last hope for understanding what was happening to their species. Wright studied genetic samples from the New Terra battle survivors with growing amazement. Every sample showed the same impossible changes. DNA sequences that had been stable for generations were suddenly active and producing new proteins. The human genome was rewriting itself in real time, and the changes seemed to be spreading from person to person through some unknown mechanism. Kevin Park worked alongside Wright as her chief geneticist. He had discovered that the DNA modifications followed patterns that made no sense according to Earth evolution. The new sequences were too complex and too perfectly designed to have developed naturally. They looked like they had been programmed by an intelligence far beyond human science. But who could have modified human genetics, and why had these changes remained dormant for so long? Meanwhile, Jake Morrison led desperate attacks against Zephyrian occupation forces from his base in the asteroid belt. Every battle revealed new, human abilities that defied explanation. Soldiers survived wounds that should have been fatal. Engineers repaired damaged equipment by touch alone. Pilots flew ships through debris fields that should have been impossible to navigate. Each victory came at great cost, but humanity was learning to fight in ways their enemies had never seen. Carlos Rodriguez discovered he could interface directly with alien technology during a raid on a Zephyrian supply depot. When he touched the enemy control systems, he somehow understood their function without training or translation. He rewrote their programming to turn their own defenses against them. The experience left him exhausted, but the knowledge remained. He began teaching other humans how to access alien systems through direct neural contact. Amy Johnson experienced the breakthrough that changed everything during a routine intelligence mission. She was attempting to decode intercepted alien communications when she detected a strange signal from an abandoned outpost in the outer system. The signal was weak and intermittent, but it used frequencies that no known species had ever employed. Against orders, she convinced Jake to investigate the source. The outpost had been built by a race called the Progenitors, according to ancient markings on the walls. No one in the galaxy remembered the Progenitors clearly. They were mentioned in the oldest alien records as the first civilization to achieve interstellar travel. Most species considered them to be myths or legends from a time before recorded history. But the technology in the outpost was clearly real and more advanced than anything the current galactic powers possessed. Amy found a device in the central chamber that resembled a crystal matrix connected to organic components. When she touched it, the device activated and began downloading massive amounts of information directly into her mind. The process was agonizing and nearly killed her, but Jake managed to break the connection before permanent damage occurred. Amy collapsed unconscious and remained in a coma for 3 days while her brain processed the alien data. When Amy finally awakened, she possessed knowledge that terrified and amazed everyone who heard it. The Progenitors had not vanished mysteriously, as the galactic histories claimed. They had been systematically hunted and destroyed by the ancestors of the current alien powers. The galaxy's oldest civilizations had united to eliminate the Progenitors because they represented a threat to the established order. The Progenitors had possessed abilities that seemed magical to lesser species. They could manipulate matter at the molecular level and interface directly with any technology. They could adapt to any environment and survive injuries that would kill other beings. Most disturbing of all, they could evolve consciously by modifying their own genetics in response to challenges. The alien powers had feared that the Progenitors would eventually replace them as the dominant force in the galaxy, but the Progenitors had not been completely destroyed. Before their final defeat, they had seeded several worlds with modified versions of their genetic code. These seeds were designed to remain dormant until the descendants reached a sufficient level of development and faced existential threats. The stress of near extinction would trigger the awakening process and restore the progenitor legacy through their hybrid offspring. Amy revealed the most shocking truth of all. Humanity was not native to Earth. They were descendants of a progenitor colony that had been placed on the primitive planet millions of years ago. The current galactic powers had discovered Earth during their expansion, but decided to manage humanity's development rather than destroy them immediately. They had spent centuries carefully controlling human progress to keep them useful but not dangerous. The aliens had planned to eventually harvest human genetic material to create controllable soldiers while eliminating the free human population. The Zephyrian ultimatum was the first step in this final solution. They knew that continued human development would eventually trigger the dormant progenitor sequences. The current crisis was exactly what their ancient programming had been waiting for. Wright confirmed Amy's revelations through analysis of the awakening humans. The genetic changes matched theoretical progenitor biology described in the downloaded data. Humanity was evolving into something that combined the best traits of both species. They retained human creativity and adaptability while gaining progenitor powers that had once ruled the galaxy. The knowledge spread through the human resistance network and triggered massive psychological changes. Knowing their true heritage gave humans confidence and purpose they had never felt before. The stress of this revelation, combined with ongoing warfare, accelerated the awakening process. More humans began displaying impossible abilities as their hidden nature finally emerged. But the awakening came with dangers. Some humans could not handle the mental strain of their expanding consciousness. Others developed powers too quickly and lost control of their abilities. A few suffered complete personality changes as progenitor memories surfaced from their genetic code. Wright realized they needed to find a way to control the process before it destroyed as many humans as it empowered. Jake Morrison felt the changes beginning in himself as he led another attack on Zephyrian forces. His ship responded to his thoughts as if it were an extension of his body. He could sense enemy movements before they appeared on sensors. His crew followed his orders with perfect coordination, as if they shared a single mind. Humanity was becoming something new, and their enemies were starting to realize the magnitude of their mistake. The news of humanity's true origin spread through hidden communication networks like wildfire across human space. On every world and space station, humans learned that they were not the weak junior species they had been told they were. They were the descendants of the galaxy's first and most powerful civilization. The psychological impact of this revelation triggered something unprecedented in human history. President Nancy Brooks sat in the Emergency Command Center beneath Washington as reports flooded in from across the solar system. Humans everywhere were experiencing spontaneous genetic activation events. The stress of learning their suppressed heritage, combined with the ongoing alien threat, was forcing the awakening process to accelerate beyond all predictions. Brooks knew she faced the most important decision in human history. Jake Morrison found himself changing in ways that both amazed and terrified him. During their latest battle against Zephyrian forces, he had piloted the Horizon through an asteroid field, using only his intuition. The ship had responded to his thoughts as if it were alive. He could feel the stress patterns in the hull and the flow of energy through the systems. Most disturbing of all, he had begun to sense the thoughts and emotions of his crew without any technological interface. Lisa Chang experienced her awakening during a high-speed chase through the rings of Saturn. Zephyrian fighters were closing in when suddenly time seemed to slow around her. She could see the path each enemy missile would take seconds before they fired. Her hands moved across the controls faster than human reflexes should allow. The ship twisted through space in maneuvers that should have killed everyone aboard, but somehow the crew survived forces that exceeded 20 times normal gravity, but not everyone handled the transformation successfully. Frank Davis had been a security officer aboard one of the civilian transports. When his awakening began, he developed strength that let him bend steel with his bare hands. Unfortunately, he could not control the power and accidentally injured several people while trying to help with repairs. The guilt and fear drove him to isolation as he struggled to master abilities that seemed to have a mind of their own. Dr. Wright worked frantically to understand the awakening process and find ways to help humans adapt safely. Her research revealed that the genetic changes were not random, but followed specific patterns based on individual psychology and environmental factors. Humans under combat stress developed enhanced reflexes and tactical awareness. Those working with technology gained the ability to interface directly with electronic systems. Scientists and doctors found their minds expanding to process vast amounts of information simultaneously. Carlos Rodriguez became the first human to successfully merge consciousness with an alien computer system. During a raid on a Zephyrian communication relay, he placed his hands on the central processor and felt his awareness expand beyond his physical body. For several minutes, he existed as pure information flowing through the alien network. He gathered intelligence about enemy fleet movements and sabotaged their coordination protocols before returning to his own body. The experience left him changed, in ways he was still discovering. Amy Johnson's condition stabilized as her brain adapted to the progenitor knowledge she had absorbed. She became humanity's living link to their ancient heritage and helped others understand their expanding abilities. Through her, they learned that the awakening was only the beginning. Fully evolved progenitors had been capable of feats that seemed like magic to current galactic civilizations. They could manipulate matter at the quantum level and project their consciousness across interstellar distances. The Federation response was swift and brutal. Council President Veltar declared humanity a galactic contamination that threatened all intelligent life. Every major species in the galaxy was ordered to contribute ships and personnel to a final solution. The assembled fleet would be larger than any force in recorded history. They intended to sterilize every world that had ever hosted human life and ensure that the progenitor legacy died forever. But humanity was no longer the helpless species that had been bullied for 2 centuries. On Mars, the mining crews discovered they could work with their equipment through direct neural interface. Production of war materials increased by orders of magnitude as humans learned to think at machine speeds. On Europa, the research teams developed new technologies by understanding alien science at an intuitive level. Weapons and defenses that should have taken decades to develop were created in weeks. The most dramatic changes occurred among the human military forces scattered throughout the galaxy. Soldiers found they could survive in hard vacuum for extended periods by slowing their metabolism through conscious control. Pilots learned to navigate hyperspace without computer assistance by sensing the flow of gravitational currents. Engineers repaired damaged ships by understanding the molecular structure of materials and rebuilding them at the atomic level. President Brooks faced a terrible choice as the alien fleet assembled for humanity's destruction. Dr. Wright had developed a way to force the awakening process in all humans simultaneously using recovered progenitor technology. The device would broadcast a genetic activation signal across the entire galaxy and trigger evolution in every person with human DNA. But the process was dangerous, and many humans might not survive the rapid transformation. The alternative was to let humanity face annihilation while most of their people remained unawakened and helpless. Brooks studied the intelligence reports showing the size of the approaching alien fleet. Thousands of ships from dozens of species all united in their determination to end the human threat. Even awakened humans might not be able to survive such overwhelming force unless they achieved their full potential quickly. Brooks made her decision and gave the order to activate the progenitor device. The signal went out across the galaxy on frequencies that penetrated every form of matter and energy. On Earth and every human colony, the broadcast triggered immediate genetic activation in millions of people simultaneously. The transformation was violent and chaotic, but it represented humanity's only chance for survival. Jake Morrison felt the signal reach him as he prepared for what might be humanity's final battle. Power flowed through his body as dormant genetic sequences activated throughout his system. His consciousness expanded beyond the confines of his skull and merged with the Horizon's computer networks. He could feel every system on the ship and sense the life force of every crew member. For the first time in his life, he understood what humans were truly capable of becoming. The galaxy would never be the same after that moment. Humanity had awakened to their birthright as the heirs of the progenitors. The ancient powers that had ruled space for millennia were about to face an enemy they had thought safely buried in the past. The real war was about to begin, and this time humans would fight with weapons their enemies had hoped never to see again. The galactic broadcast changed everything in ways that no one had anticipated. Across human space, ordinary people discovered they possessed abilities that defied every law of physics and biology. Farmers on agricultural worlds found they could communicate directly with alien plant life and accelerate crop growth through touch alone. Children in schools began solving complex mathematical problems through pure intuition while their teachers watched in amazement. Even elderly humans discovered their bodies could repair age damage and function at levels they had not experienced since youth. War Marshal Zenthor of the Crystalline Hegemony commanded the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history. 2,000 ships from 37 different species had gathered to eliminate the human threat once and for all. The fleet included planet-killing dreadnoughts and weapons that could destabilize solar systems. Zenthor had studied human military capabilities extensively and calculated that victory would require no more than 72 hours of sustained bombardment. But when the alien fleet arrived at Earth, they encountered something that shattered every assumption about human limitations. The Sol system had been transformed into a fortress that seemed to violate the basic principles of engineering and physics. Massive defense platforms had been constructed in impossible time frames using technologies that should not have existed. The platforms moved through space without visible propulsion and generated energy shields that bent light around them. Jake Morrison no longer commanded just a single ship. His consciousness had expanded to encompass an entire fleet of vessels that responded to his thoughts as extensions of his own body. The Horizon had been rebuilt using principles that combined human engineering with awakened understanding of matter manipulation. The ship could now repair itself in real time and adapt its configuration for any tactical situation. Most remarkably, it had begun to exhibit signs of independent thought and personality. The first engagement between the alien fleet and awakened humanity lasted only minutes, but demonstrated the fundamental shift in galactic power. Human ships moved through space in patterns that seemed to ignore gravitational forces and conservation of momentum. They fired weapons that converted energy directly into matter and created localized distortions in space-time itself. When Zenthor's forces attempted to respond with conventional tactics, they found their targeting systems could not track enemies that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Lisa Chang had become something more than human, but not entirely other. Her consciousness could exist independently of her physical body and pilot ships through direct neural interface. During the battle, she projected herself into 3 different vessels at once and coordinated their movements with perfect precision. She could perceive the flow of space-time around massive objects and navigate through gravitational fields that would tear normal ships apart. The alien commanders realized they faced an enemy that had evolved beyond their ability to comprehend or counter. Human weapons operated on principles that their science claimed were impossible. Soldiers could survive in hard vacuum indefinitely and seemed to regenerate from injuries that should have been fatal. Most disturbing of all, the humans appeared to be getting stronger and more capable as the battle continued, rather than weakening from fatigue and casualties. Carlos Rodriguez had learned to interface directly with alien technology on a scale that threatened the enemy's entire command structure. His consciousness could penetrate their secured networks and rewrite their programming from within. He turned their own ships against each other and caused critical systems to malfunction at precisely the wrong moments. The aliens found themselves fighting not just human forces but their own equipment as it was subverted by an intelligence they could not detect or counter. But the transformation was not limited to military applications. On human worlds that had been occupied by alien forces, the local populations began demonstrating abilities that made conventional control impossible. Farmers could accelerate plant growth to provide unlimited food supplies. Workers could reshape metal and stone through direct manipulation of molecular bonds. Even children could heal injuries and illnesses that had previously required advanced medical technology. Dr. Wright coordinated the global awakening process from her expanded laboratory complex on Europa. Her own consciousness had evolved to process vast amounts of information simultaneously, and she could perceive patterns across millions of individual transformations. She discovered that humans were not just recovering progenitor abilities, but combining them with uniquely human traits to create something entirely new. The awakened humans retained their creativity and emotional complexity while gaining powers that had once seemed godlike. They could work together with a level of coordination that resembled a collective intelligence, but without losing their individual personalities and motivations. This combination of traits had never existed before in galactic history, and it gave humanity advantages that even the progenitors had not possessed. Amy Johnson had become a living repository of knowledge that spanned millions of years of galactic history. Through her connection to the progenitor database, she could access information about every species and civilization that had ever existed. She coordinated with resistance movements on alien worlds and helped oppressed species understand their own hidden potential. Many beings who had served the galactic powers for millennia began to question whether their loyalty had been freely given or artificially enforced. The tide of war shifted dramatically as awakened humans began liberating occupied worlds through demonstration rather than conquest. When alien populations saw what humans had become, many realized they had been living as slaves to powers that had deliberately suppressed their own evolution. Ancient client races that had served the Federation for thousands of years began joining the human cause and seeking their own awakening. President Brooks found herself coordinating not just a war for human survival, but a galaxy-wide revolution against the established order. Species that had been subjugated for millennia saw humanity's transformation as proof that the current system could be changed. They provided intelligence about alien military capabilities and safe havens for human forces operating behind enemy lines. The Federation's response grew increasingly desperate as their control over the galaxy began to collapse. Veltar authorized the use of weapons that had been banned for centuries, including devices that could sterilize entire solar systems. But even these ultimate weapons proved ineffective against enemies who could manipulate matter and energy at the quantum level. Jake Morrison led the final assault on the Federation's Central Command Complex in a battle that took place across multiple dimensions of space-time. His fleet consisted of ships that existed partially outside normal reality and could strike targets through barriers that should have been impenetrable. The engagement lasted only hours, but resulted in the complete destruction of the galactic power structure that had ruled for millions of years. The old galaxy was dying and something new was being born in its place. Humanity had not just awakened to their own potential, but had become catalysts for the evolution of all intelligent life. The ancient cycle of domination and submission was ending, and a new age of unlimited growth and discovery was beginning. But the greatest challenges still lay ahead as awakened humanity faced the responsibility of guiding other species toward their own transformation. The final battle for the galaxy took place not in the physical realm, but in the dimension of pure consciousness, where thoughts became reality and willpower determined the laws of physics. The surviving alien powers had retreated to an ancient fortress built by the first civilizations to achieve interstellar travel. From this stronghold, they activated a weapon that had been created to prevent exactly what humanity represented. The consciousness suppressor had been designed by the original galactic powers millions of years ago when they first encountered the progenitors. It could broadcast a signal across entire star systems that would lock any species into their current evolutionary state and prevent further development. The device had been used to maintain the galactic hierarchy for eons by ensuring that younger races never grew powerful enough to challenge their masters. Dr. Wright detected the weapon's activation from her laboratory on Europa as it began to affect human minds across the galaxy. Awakened humans found their new abilities becoming unstable and their enhanced consciousness fragmenting back toward normal limitations. The aliens intended to force humanity back into their previous state of development and then eliminate them before they could evolve again. But Wright had spent months studying progenitor technology, and she understood something the aliens had forgotten. The consciousness suppressor could be reversed and turned into an evolution accelerator if its quantum matrices were reconfigured properly. Instead of locking species into stagnation, it could force them to evolve beyond their current limitations. Whether they were ready or not, Amy Johnson worked with Wright to access the weapon through the Galactic Communication Network. Her consciousness had become so expanded that she could exist partially within computer systems and manipulate them through direct thought interface. Together, they began the complex process of rewriting the suppressor's programming while under constant attack from alien cybersecurity systems. Jake Morrison led a fleet of awakened human ships toward the alien fortress in a desperate race against time. His consciousness now spanned multiple vessels, and he could coordinate their movements with perfect precision. The ships moved through space using principles that the aliens still could not understand or counter. They phased between dimensions to avoid weapons fire and struck back with energy beams that converted matter directly into exotic particles. The alien fortress was defended by the combined might of every surviving galactic power. Zephyrian dreadnoughts formed the outer perimeter while Etherian mine ships provided psychic shields. Crystalline hegemony vessels created gravitational barriers and temporal distortion fields. But awakened humanity had evolved beyond the limitations that had once made these defenses effective. Lisa Chang piloted her consciousness through the fortress's defensive network like a ghost moving through solid walls. She could perceive the flow of energy and information throughout the alien structure and identify weak points that conventional sensors would never detect. Her attacks came from directions that did not exist in normal space-time and struck targets through barriers that should have been impenetrable. Carlos Rodriguez penetrated the fortress's central computer core and began the process of turning their own systems against them. His consciousness merged with the alien networks, and he rewrote their programming from within. Defense turrets began firing on their own ships while life support systems malfunctioned in critical areas. The aliens found themselves fighting not just human invaders, but their own technology as it turned hostile under Carlos's influence. The confrontation between President Veltar and the awakened humans took place in a realm where physical laws were determined by force of will rather than scientific principles. Veltar had evolved his consciousness over millions of years and possessed psychic abilities that could reshape reality itself. But he faced enemies who combined ancient power with human creativity and adaptability. The battle raged across multiple levels of existence as each side tried to impose their vision of reality on the other. Veltar created weapons from pure thought and summoned forces that had destroyed civilizations. The humans responded by evolving in real time to counter each attack and developing new abilities that should have taken millennia to master. Wright and Johnson succeeded in reversing the consciousness suppressor just as the psychic battle reached its climax. Instead of locking species into evolutionary stagnation, the device began broadcasting signals that forced rapid development in every intelligent being within its range. The effect spread outward from the fortress at the speed of light and began transforming the galaxy itself. The ancient alien powers found themselves undergoing the same awakening process they had spent millions of years trying to prevent. Their carefully maintained psychological barriers collapsed as suppressed evolutionary potential erupted throughout their populations. Some species embraced the change and began developing abilities they had never imagined possible. Others resisted and suffered mental fragmentation as their consciousness expanded beyond their ability to control. Veltar himself was transformed by the process he had tried to prevent. His million-year-old consciousness shattered and reformed as human concepts of growth and change overwrote his static worldview. For the first time in eons, he experienced genuine uncertainty and the possibility of becoming something other than what he had always been. The revelation was both terrifying and liberating. Jake Morrison found himself face to face with the transformed alien leader in the ruins of the fortress. Veltar no longer radiated the arrogant superiority that had defined his species for millennia. Instead, he seemed confused and vulnerable as he struggled to understand his new perspective on existence. Morrison realized that victory had come not through destruction, but through forced evolution. The galaxy began to change in ways that no one had anticipated. Species that had been locked in the same patterns for millions of years suddenly discovered new forms of art and science and philosophy. Ancient enemies found common ground as their consciousness expanded beyond tribal limitations. Young races that had been suppressed by the old powers began developing abilities that surpassed their former masters. Some civilizations could not handle the rapid transformation and retreated to distant galaxies where the evolution signal had not yet reached. The Zephyrians and several other militant species chose exile rather than face the uncertainty of unlimited growth. They departed with warnings that they would return someday to restore the old order, but their threats carried little conviction. Humanity found itself in the unprecedented position of being guides rather than rulers for the new galactic civilization. Their unique combination of ancient power and youthful creativity made them natural teachers for species learning to transcend their limitations. Human colonies became centers of learning where beings from across the galaxy came to explore their expanding potential. Dr. Wright established research centers that studied the ongoing evolution of galactic consciousness. She discovered that the transformation was continuing to accelerate as different species learned from each other and developed hybrid abilities. The galaxy was becoming a vast laboratory for exploring the limits of what intelligent life could achieve. The story concluded with a scene that would have been impossible just years earlier. A human child born after the Great Awakening played with alien children whose species had once ruled the galaxy. The young beings casually demonstrated abilities that their ancestors would have considered godlike, while their parents watched with wonder and pride. The galaxy had become a place of unlimited possibility where evolution itself had no limits, and every day brought new discoveries about what life could become.